Iran's newly elected president, Ebrahim Raisi, prepares to take office. What will his victory mean for nuclear negotiations and stability in the Middle East? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and this is The Heat. Top diplomats say progress was made in the latest round of talks to negotiate and restore the 2015 nuclear agreement. It's now up to the governments involved in the negotiations to make some decisions. It was the first official meeting in Vienna since Iran's hardline judiciary chief won in the country's presidential election in a landslide victory. The inauguration of Ebrahim Raisi is still 6 weeks away, allowing for an opportunity to make a possible deal. Iran's top negotiator expressed some optimism about this weekend's talks.
We are closer to a deal than any time in the past, but it doesn't mean that we are there. The remaining job is still difficult and needs lots of efforts and further talks. So we decided to cut negotiations here, go back home, not only for consultations, but this time for decision making.
For more now on Iran's new president and the nuclear talks, let's bring in our panel. Joining us from Washington, D.C. is Barbara Slavin. She is the director of the Future of Iran Initiative and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. Also with us is Sina Azodi. He is a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council and a PhD candidate in international affairs at the University of South Florida. From Tampa, Florida, Mohsen Milani is the executive director of the Center for Strategic and Diplomatic Studies at the University of South Florida. And Ali Akbar Dareni is a researcher and writer for the journal at the Center of Strategic Studies in Tehran, in Iran. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Ali Akbar Dareni, let me start with you in Iran, in Tehran. Let's talk about the man who will be president, the incoming president, Ebrahim Raisi. He was the country's first judiciary chief, as I mentioned. He did secure a landslide victory. What can you tell us about him and his politics?
Ebrahim Raisi's victory puts conservatives in full control of all branches of power. President-elect Raisi is expected to create a government that will not be at odds with other branches of power inside Iran. So that will be a crucial element in taking Iran forward. And his election will have important implications, not only for Iran, but for the Middle East and the international community. He is a confidant of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. His views mirror those of the Supreme Leader. So the fact that he's trusted by the Supreme Leader will allow him to work without opposition inside Iran. So that means Raisi's landslide victory means that there will be less political bickerings and probably no internal political fightings at all, because he enjoys the support of other branches of power. But the other important thing is that Raisi will look for solutions inside the country rather than outside. There will be, Iran's strategic direction will remain unchanged, but there will be changes in Iran's policies. There will be changes in tactics, and there will be a change in Iran's tone in foreign relations, and there will be a change in priorities. The Raisi administration believes that all previous governments in Iran have been looking to the West. So he's going to bring some normalcy in Iran's relations with the outside world. He will seek to improve relations with China and Russia. He will give priority to strengthening ties with Iran's neighbors. He will follow pivot to Asia policy, so that he will bring a balance in Iran's relations with the outside world. This is a foreign policy he will follow.
Sina Azodi, turnout during this election was relatively low. Less than 50% of voters turned out to cast ballots. The figure was somewhere around 40%, I think. To what do you attribute that low turnout?
A number of issues. One was, I think, really people being dissatisfied with how President Rouhani managed Iran's economy. So basically the mismanagement of the economy. That's a critical issue. Remember that when President Rouhani came in 2015, he promised that he will improve the economic situation in the country. He could not deliver on his promises, mainly because of the reimposition of sanctions by President Trump in 2018. That's one issue. Second, of course, a contributing factor was the issue of Corona. Obviously, people don't turn out. Thirdly, I think another issue was really the campaign inside and outside the country to boycott the elections. Remember that when the Guardian Council, the unelected body council that vets the candidates, it basically disqualified a large number of people, including many like Ali Larijani, the former Speaker of Majlis, an insider of the regime. He was disqualified, and many people were just surprised and shocked by how really the Guardian Council went that far. So that's inside the country. The reformists could not really present a strong candidate. And obviously from outside, there was a strong campaign to discourage people from voting. So I think there's a combination of factors that led to this such a low turnout.
Do you think the fact that it was a low turnout, Sina, will actually put any kind of a question mark over the legitimacy of the new president?
Not really. I mean, at the end of the day, a year from now, 6 months from now, 2 years from now, he'll still be the president, and nobody will say, you know, he came with, you know, a quarter. I mean, when President Rouhani came, and he came with a good turnout, he had the mandate of people, but at the end of the day, not only he couldn't deliver, but nobody really spoke about, well, he had the mandate of people. So I think this applies to this president as well, too. At the end of the day, he's the president of the Islamic Republic, and he has to manage the country somehow.
Moshe Milani, as we heard from Ali Akbar Durrani a moment ago, Raisi's election marks a consolidation of power for the country's conservative clerical establishment, which already has a majority in the country's parliament. But you know, and we also heard, he also told us that there'll be less of the relationship with the West would be not a priority for the new incoming president. But how significant would this consolidation of power be for Iranians themselves?
Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be with the other distinguished panelists. I don't know what you mean, what impact does it have on the lives of Iranians? If you are talking about domestic politics or you're talking about foreign policy?
Domestic politics.
Frankly, domestic politics. I think, for one thing, this election, in my judgment, was one of the worst elections I have observed in the history of the Islamic Republic. I say worst because not only of low voter turnout, but also because of the number of people who went to the voting stations and decided not to vote. They just submitted a clean slate. As a matter of fact, after Mr. Raisi, the second winner of the election is those who did not vote for anyone. The way everybody knows that the elections in Iran are controlled at the nominating process. So there was nothing unusual about the Guardian Council disqualify a significant number of people. And Sina is absolutely correct. They were over 500 and they decided to qualify only 7. What was unusual, not only in terms of voter turnout, but the way they managed the elections. It was not managed properly. It did not create any excitement in Iran. And I think it now, Mr. Raisi has received the lowest electoral support in the history of the Islamic Republic. Now, what that means, it all depends on what Mr. Raisi is going to do within the next 2 or 3 months. What kind of candidate, what kind of cabinet is he going to form? Is cabinet going to represent only one faction? Or having recognized that people are very unhappy with the way this election was conducted, he is going to try to appease other elements of the governing class and allow some moderates, some powerful moderates, to serve in his cabinet. The second issue, which is going to decide, I think, more than anything else, is whether he can manage to improve the Iranian economy. Many people did not vote in the elections, especially the middle class, because when America withdrew from the nuclear deal and imposed draconian sanctions, it essentially destroyed Iranian middle class. A significant portion of that middle class became lower class, and they did not vote. And even and when they voted, they did not vote for a moderate candidate. So he has to improve the economy. And if he cannot improve the economy, I believe things are going to get completely out of control in Iran, and they better have a plan for this. And he will not be able to improve the economy. He will not be able to improve the economy in the short run without reaching an agreement with the United States of America. Your earlier speaker said that Mr. Raisi is not that interested in dealing with the West or with America. The reality is that the West and America are interested in dealing with Iran in terms of its nuclear program. And as long as we cannot reach a nuclear agreement with the West, and as long as we don't try to improve relations with the West, things are not going to get any better in Iran.
Barbara Slavin, we hear how important it is for the Iranian government to reach out to the West, to reach out to the United States as part of their foreign policy. Whether the new incoming President Raisi likes it or not. In fact, when he was asked whether he had any interest in meeting President Biden, he responded with a very firm no. He is deeply distrustful of the United States. What are your expectations for this presidency?
Well, first, let me say what an absolute pleasure it is to be with you, Anand, and also with Mohsen Milani and Sina Azodi. I have to say that expectations are rock bottom, and that's probably the best thing that Raisi has going for him, because people expect so little from this man. Anything he can do to improve the lives of ordinary Iranians will be welcomed. You haven't spoken at all about his background, which is as a prosecutor and someone who signed off on the execution of 5,000 political prisoners in 1988. This is someone who has had blood on his hands for a very long time. He is an apparatchik from Mashhad, from eastern Iran, the hometown of the supreme leader. He has no real independent base. He is entirely a creature of the regime, and particularly of Ayatollah Khamenei. So he has a lot to prove to show that he has a bare minimum of competence, frankly. He has no experience in the West. I don't believe he's ever traveled to the West. I don't think he speaks any English. So we're going to be looking very closely to see his cabinet, as was pointed out by Mohsen Milani and by Sina, to see if he puts some competent people in place. But he's going to have a hard act to follow. People like Javad Zarif, who are so accomplished in dealing with the United States. Will he be able to find people of that stature? I doubt it. The good news, however, is that we still have a bit of time to get this nuclear deal back on track before he takes office in August, and I think that's crucial.
Barbara, how does he reconcile what seems to be contradictory goals? On the one hand, turning away from the West, lessening dependence on the West, and at the same time trying to reach some kind of a deal, a nuclear deal in this instance with the West, so that sanctions are lifted, so that he does get the domestic economy going. Yeah,
well, again, this can be accomplished by the current team of negotiators who negotiated the deal to begin with. So Raisi doesn't have to lift a finger, frankly. He just has to stay out of the way. I should point out that even for Iran to benefit from trade relations with China and investment from China, it needs to have this agreement back in place. It needs to have sanctions lifted.
Ali Akbar Durrani, of course, the main foreign policy issue that we're talking about here is the restoration of the nuclear deal, which was unilaterally violated by the United States. Raisi was also asked about that deal, which is also known as the JCPOA. This was his response. Let's listen.
The Americans violated the JCPOA and the Europeans did not fulfill their commitments. What I want to stress to the US is that based on the nuclear deal, you were obligated to lift the sanctions and you did not. Return and fulfill your commitments. To the Europeans, I say that they should definitely not remain pressured by American policies and should fulfill their commitments under the JCPOA.
So, Ali, it will be a few weeks before the president-elect now, Raisi, is sworn in as the new president. We could have a nuclear deal before he is sworn in. What do you see happening in the next few weeks?
First of all, Raisi's election will not disrupt Iran's efforts to revive the JCPOA. His administration will not be an obstacle in the way of saving the JCPOA from total collapse. He has indicated he will support reviving the nuclear deal, so he is committed to that. But definitely, President-elect Raisi is skeptical of the West. He is suspicious of the West, and that suspicion has been strengthened after the United States unilaterally pulled out of the JCPOA in violation of all its commitments. And Iran has been disappointed by the fact that the Europeans did not keep their part of the deal. But at the same time, I expect President-elect Raisi to continue interaction with the outside world. He will try to get a deal done and to finalize the talks. He will support that process. But those priorities are going to change. The outgoing Rouhani administration's priority was to get the sanctions lifted. For the Raisi administration, the number one priority will be to nullify the sanctions, to make the sanctions ineffective through a policy which is called economy of resistance, strengthening relations with Iran's neighbors, and improving relations with China. He is a big supporter of the 25-year cooperation agreement with China. But at the same time, his second priority will be to get the sanctions lifted through negotiations. So he will simultaneously pursue both solutions. At the same time, I believe that there is a golden opportunity for the Biden administration to save the JCPOA from collapse during this period, from now until President-elect Raisi is inaugurated. These 45 days will be crucial in making sure that the JCPOA will be protected.
Barbara Slavin, listening to those comments there by the president-elect, he is distrustful of the United States, as we heard, and as Ali just told us now, he's very skeptical about the United States. I mean, does he have a point here, and is it now incumbent on the United States to prove that its signature means something, that if an agreement is signed, that it's not going to be torn up in 2024 if a new president gets into office?
Well, of course he has a point. Donald Trump did enormous damage by pulling out of the JCPOA when Iran was in full compliance. But no American president can promise that an agreement like this is going to go on beyond his administration, and I think the Iranians realize that. Look, this is a short-term measure to provide Iran with some relief in return for hauling back its nuclear program, getting rid of stockpiles of enriched uranium, providing confidence that it can't build a nuclear weapon. And in the context of the Middle East, the way it is now, frankly, I think that's good enough.
Mm-hmm. Sina Azodi, the negotiators in Vienna, they're very upbeat about a possible deal. Do you think that could be achieved in the next few weeks?
Yes, I'm cautiously optimistic. I think from what we hear is that there's an overall agreement or a text, a draft of a text of an agreement, but it hasn't been finalized yet. From what I hear from Deputy Foreign Minister Araghchi, who's leading the Iranian team, they have an agreement, but they're filling the blanks, and they have to go to Tehran. And they make their final decision in Tehran whether they can agree to a final text. But as I said, I'm cautiously optimistic, and I would even say that they could choose a day, maybe July 15th, which was the day that the JCPOA was signed. Again, we have to see how things will go. But as I said, I'm optimistic that we are going to have a deal.
What should we read into the fact that the chief negotiator, as we heard earlier in the show, saying that he's going back home now, he's going to Tehran, and it's time for decision-making?
Well, there are certainly decisions that it's not his place to make. He has to answer to Foreign Minister Zarif. He has more authority. And of course, Foreign Minister Zarif, he has to answer to President Rouhani and Ayatollah Khamenei as the ultimate decision maker in Iran. So while he is leading the negotiating team, he doesn't have that authority to make such a big decision for Iran as a country. So that's why he has to go and make the decision in Tehran, get the approval, and then come back to Vienna with an approval or a disapproval, which I think, again, as I said, the system itself has decided to go back to the agreement. Now, what we have now is that who is going to benefit from the sanctions relief, which we believe it's going to be Raisi, who will take over in 44 days.
Moshe Milani, there is one other complication in this nuclear deal, and that is Israel, the United States' closest ally in the Middle East. Israel is fiercely opposed to this deal. In fact, the outgoing Israeli intelligence chief has intimated that Israel has carried out attacks on Iran's nuclear program. He also threatened to assassinate more of Iran's scientists if this program goes on. This is what the new Israeli Prime Minister, Naftali Bennett, had to say.
Raisi's selection is, I would say, the last chance for the world powers to wake up before returning to the nuclear agreement and to understand who they're doing business with. A regime of brutal hangmen must never be allowed to have weapons of mass destruction that will enable it to not to kill thousands but millions. Israel's position will not change on this.
Moshe Milani, does this complicate the situation in any significant way?
I don't think so. It's going to complicate it a bit, but not much. And the reason for it is because this is not anything new that the new prime minister is saying. Mr. Netanyahu before him has been saying the same thing, has been playing the same tune for decades. And the United States has decided that it is in America's national interest to take care of Iran's nuclear program before it gets too late. What I am worried is not so much what Israel can do. What I'm worried about is what Mr. Raisi said today. They asked him about negotiations with the U.S., and he said he doesn't have any problem, and he is on record for saying that he doesn't have any problem with the restoration of the nuclear deal. However, he adamantly said that he is not going to negotiate with the U.S. about Iran's missile program and about Iran's regional policies, which means that if this is the case, if Iran is really playing that game, if Iran is really going to play that hard game, I'm not very sure if the U.S. and the its Western allies are going to do what they were going to do if, for example, we would have had another moderate government in Iran. The point that I'm trying to make is that the U.S. is willing to go back to the JCPOA on the condition that Iran is willing to discuss other issues. And if the Iranian position is that just give us the sanction relief and we are going to go back to whatever they are doing, I'm afraid this is going to create all kinds of problems, not only for the Islamic Republic, but for the region itself.
Ali Akbar Durrani, what is the view from Tehran? Do you think the Iranians would be prepared to make that concession to include, let's say, talks about missile development in an agreement?
Iranians don't want, to hear anything other than lifting the sanctions first. I don't think, a wise government will put its national defense on the table for negotiations. What President-elect Raisi said today was not surprising at all, and this is what outgoing President Rouhani has been saying for a long time. The JCPOA was limited to the nuclear issue. It did not cover other issues. Because the 5+1 countries in Iran knew that if they wanted to discuss non-nuclear issues, they had to, enter negotiations for years without any agreement. If the Americans are going to raise the issue of Iran's missile program or its regional influence, then Iran will have a long list of its own demands.
Right.
The U.S. military bases in this region. The United States has encircled Iran, has put Iran's national interests in jeopardy. The United States is providing weapons to Iran's neighbors. The U.S. has the U.S. sale of weapons has put this region in danger. So Iran will have a long list of its own demands, and there will be no agreement. So they decided that at least they can shorten their list and focus on the nuclear issue if they want a deal to be achieved. That was done.
Yeah, Barbara, very quickly, I've only got 30 seconds. What is your view on this? I mean, could this be a deal breaker? Will the United States insist on talking about missile development and also expanding the timeline that was in the JCPOA in the first instance?
No, I don't think it'll be a deal breaker. I think the U.S. is obligated to say that it wants to have follow-on negotiations. But as I said earlier, I think simply restoring the JCPOA, that means Iran can't have enough material to build a single nuclear weapon until 2031, and that's an achievement.
Okay, and that's where we have to leave it. Thanks to all of you for being with us. That is it for this edition of The Heat. I'm Anand Naidu in Washington, D.C. Thanks for watching.